doubt yourself, do it anyway. I mean, you really have to move into this mindset of pursue the things that you're passionate about, allow yourself to fail, allow yourself to make mistakes because you're going to, and just give yourself permission to be human.
This is Herd Business School, where we sit down with private practice owners and industry experts to learn about the business of therapy together. I'm your host, Michael Fulwiler. Welcome back for Season 2 of Herd Business School. Thank you so much for the support for Season 1. It's been a few months, so it's great to be back. If you're just joining us for the first time, we're glad you're here. My guest this week is a good one. He's a neurodivergent entrepreneur, therapist, and founder of All Things Private Practice. He's a TEDx speaker, group practice owner, coach, retreat planner, and podcast host. After burning out in community mental health, he launched his own practice and scaled it to a 20-person team. He was diagnosed with autism at 35, a turning point that now informs his work and content. He was also diagnosed with a rare condition that affects his vocal cords, which totally transformed his work and business. Now he helps therapists grow their businesses without losing themselves through international retreats. One of the things I appreciate most about him is his authenticity, which we dive into. As a disclaimer, this episode does have some strong language. Here is my conversation with my friend, Patrick Casale. Enjoy. Patrick Casale, welcome to the show.
First person in a long time who's got my last name right, man.
I practice it. I want to say Patrick Casale.
Yeah, people say Casale, Casale, all of those things, yeah. I just roll with it. I've always been like, whatever.
Yeah, well, glad we nailed that. Start the beginning here. Very grateful that you've made time to come on the show. You're probably the busiest guy that I know. I will say that whenever I send you an email, you almost immediately respond.
There's a reason for that, though.
What's your secret?
My secret is being a AuDHD or autistic ADHD human and who has significant amounts of demand or drive for autonomy. I don't want to say demand avoidance. I have to clear my notifications, but it's a twofold thing. It's a double-edged sword. I need to clear them immediately because they bother me. But then I feel like I have to respond immediately so I don't forget. So it's a constant limbo process of not wanting to ever open my inbox ever, and then opening it far too frequently to constantly be responding or clearing.
That makes sense. I'm one of those guys that I have, if you looked at my phone, I have like 10,000 unread emails, which would probably stress a lot of people out. So.
I don't know if we can be friends anymore.
Oh, sorry, man. We have a lot to cover. Very excited for this conversation. I've been looking forward to it. Would love to start with your entrepreneurial journey. When did you first get serious about becoming a therapist?
I don't know, man. I was very lost for very long times of my life, and I've always been drawn to just building relationships with people. I think like in college, some of my friends would make fun of me for constantly talking to maybe unhoused people in Plattsburgh, New York, and always checking in with them and wondering if they were okay. And I just knew connection for me meant everything because I've so often felt like so disconnected in my life. And I ultimately think that it was always a pathway. My mom was a therapist as well, but I tried to avoid it at all costs because like so many of us, like unresolved childhood stuff. And I was like, I'm not doing what my mom did because that was a mess. And then, as I like fought through about an 8-year gambling addiction, there was a lot of therapy involved. And coming out of the other side, I'd impulsively had moved to Asheville, North Carolina from upstate New York in 2011. I was just kind of running for my life, if I'm being honest. And that was kind of like a last ditch effort of like, maybe I'll figure out how to abstain from gambling and maybe I'll do it for a year and I'll go back to New York and finish my master's. It was going to be in school counseling. Fun fact is I despise kids. Just really wanted summers off,
Right.
And then 2011 has turned into 2025. And I ended up working at a nonprofit here in Western North Carolina to help end homelessness here in the rural parts of the state, and ended up going back to get my master's in 2015.
So you go back to grad school, graduate 2015. Did you go right to an agency from grad school?
I did a really fun internship at a methadone clinic where I had to be there every day at 4 a.m. And then I took a job at a 24/7 walk-in behavioral health urgent care. It was one of the first of its kind. And I was like, yeah, I finally made it. Like, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And that certainly was not the case.
Was private practice on your radar at that point?
No, it was only like a pipe dream and this vision of like, if I burn myself out enough and I get enough experience in community mental health, then I can finally start my private practice. And I just remember having like a few friends and colleagues in town who had left their agency jobs to start private practices. And I was always like kind of envious, but also super proud, just like, damn, that sounds like an amazing venture. And I also have no idea what it means to do that. So I really thought that I would be in community mental health for my entire life. And that lasted about 2 years.
You tell a story of when you were leaving your job in community mental health, you did an exit interview. What did they tell you?
You've done your research, Michael. It's a story I tell very often, though. I remember going to this exit interview with my program manager. And, I was one of those people who was in middle management. So I was always like, damned if you do or don't, and could never support my staff enough. We never had enough resources, but the administrative staff was always like, we need more productivity with less resources. And I gave a 90-day notice and they replaced me in 2 days. And I had written that 90-day notice so many times and was like so convinced that how is my staff going to function without me? How's the program going to run without me? And they're like, yeah, we don't care. You're gone. I remember going to the exit interview with the program manager at the time of the program I was helping run. And she was a friend, or someone I considered to be a friend at the time. And she's just said like, you're not going to make it on your own. Nobody does. You'll be back here in 30 days. And I was just like, that is a really bizarre thing to say. And I had to really wrestle with that for a while. And I assume some of it was just her own stuff being projected outwards. Like, that job sucked. And I can imagine it felt like grief for me to be leaving it. But it definitely hit me in a way where I was like, I'm going to use this as motivation every day of my life.
Fuck that, right?
Yep.
Like,
yep.
It seems like it's almost by design, though, right? That the system is set up to keep therapists in community mental health where there's a lack of education about opportunities in private practice and kind of beyond community mental health. Although I feel like that's changed. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would say over the last 5 years, especially, when I was leaving community mental health, I think I only knew of like Allison Prier, who's also here in Asheville, Abundance Practice Building. And, she had her like infamous, like, start your private practice checklist. And I was like looking through it day by day. And I was like, I don't know what an MPI is or an EIN or like how to actually get client, all of the things. But we're so conditioned in this profession to like shy away from risk taking. And it's almost taboo to even talk about business ownership in grad school. Like, the only times we ever talked about it in our program was like the running joke of, you don't get into this industry to make money, and like nobody makes it successfully. Or if you're in private practice, you're doing it part-time or on the side or at night and on weekends to supplement income. And it was never talked about from the perspective of like, oh, you can actually like have a really fulfilling career and make as much money as you want to and help so many people doing significantly less hours of work. And it was never discussed. But fast forward to now, and we have all these private practice coaches and all these people who help people build practices and group practices. And it's like, it's becoming much more commonplace, I think.
What were the first steps that you took to start your practice after you left your job?
I was building it at night while I was at my job. So I was like trying to convince myself that if I got to a threshold of like, if I get like 10 clients, then it will give me the confidence to quit my job and I'll be fine and transition like seamlessly into it. And I remember when I put my notice in, it was like synchronistic maybe. And maybe the universe was like trying to test me. But 7 of those 10 clients like just disappeared. They were like, either move out of the state, just stop coming to therapy, whatever. And I was just like, oh, I just made the worst mistake of my life. And I maybe need to go ask for my job back.
So at that point, are you like, do you form an LLC? It sounds like you were kind of building a practice on the side, but what about like the infrastructure? Because I know for a lot of therapists, I can feel really intimidating, right? Like, oh, I need to form a business entity, or I need to go get a bank account, or I have to get, an EIN, all of that stuff.
I just added like very bare bones. And I recommend anyone who's listening, like the old saying of like, obviously it's all state dependent and licensure specific. So take it with a grain of salt. But I had a sole proprietorship. I had a DBA, like a doing business as. I had a business bank account and didn't really have much else. Like I had an EHR medical record system. I was still doing like paper notes a lot of the time. Payment systems were wonky. Like I would use like IV Pay sometimes, or sometimes I would use Simple Practice, and like it was a mess. But I was just like making it work the best I knew how to, and making a lot of mistakes, which was super important and allowed me to always like constantly step back, reevaluate, analyze, and then like pivot and adapt.
Do you remember like what were some of those mistakes that you made looking back?
Oh yeah. So one that always sticks out to me is I had no cancellation policy in place at all. And I didn't have any credit cards on file. So like very early on, had like 3 back-to-back no-show late cancels and couldn't charge any of them because I had no policy in place and I hadn't discussed it with anybody. And I just remember like sitting in my office in the dark, so depressed, so sad, convinced myself like you clearly are not cut out to own your own business. And then thankfully, using some like regulation skills and exhibiting some restraint, just convinced myself, I was like, okay, this is annoying. This really does suck. It's very frustrating, but it's so fixable. Like we can create the policy, have all of our clients sign it going forward, get the cards on file, and start like talking about the policies and procedures that so many of us are so concerned about having conversations about. It really was a good pivotal moment for me to just be like, this is definitely not going to be the thing that completely sinks the ship. And it's so, all of this stuff can be revised and edited and changed a million times over.
I think that's such an important point. I think a lot of therapists wait to go into private practice because they don't have everything lined up. They don't have all the forms. They don't have all the paperwork, but that's okay. You'll figure it out. Stuff happens. I remember we had Melvin Varghese from Selling the Couch on the show, and he talked about a similar experience. He was in Pennsylvania and there was like a big snowstorm and he had to like cancel all of his clients for the week and he lost like $1,000. He just sort of had this moment of like, wow, I need to figure something else out to help to supplement my income in the event. And that was more of like a natural disaster than a cancellation policy, but that led him towards podcasting and online courses and diversifying his income because he realized like, if I don't see clients, like I don't make money.
Yep. Yeah. 100%. And going to your point about like therapists feeling like they need to perfect it. I mean, I did a lot of that too, but a lot of my coaching was so much geared on mistakes that I had made. Like my website at first was terrible. I think I found some random guy online who was building a portfolio. He charged me like $100. It was so bad, but it existed. Perfectionism, is such the thief of joy because I have always kind of tapped into imperfect action of like build the plane as you fly it. And I always do things ass backwards in a lot of ways. And so many of my therapy coaching clients would be like, I have to demo every single EHR under the sun to find the perfect one. But that's just like preventing you from starting, right? Instead, if you just pick one, you will then force yourself to learn it as you go because you're going to get client inquiries and then you're going to have to figure it out. So for a lot of people, that can feel very counterintuitive, but in reality, it really is the catalyst to moving forward. And I think it's so important to get out of that perfectionism mode. So many people won't launch their websites or their Psych Todays because it's not perfect. It never will be. And the beauty is you can change it a million times. I can't tell you how many websites I've done and redesigned, and since that really bad one in 2017. So everything is just like a living doc and template, and it can always be edited and improved and fixed and changed.
I like to say perfectionism is the enemy of progress, right? And so we see that in marketing as well. You can always change it later. Just ship it, get it out there, and iterate.
Being visible is better than being non-existent. Your clients can't find you if you can't put it out into the world. And they can find you even if you have a really shitty website. So,
right. You started your private practice, you're building it up. How long did it take for you to become full, or what you would consider full in terms of the amount of clients that you wanted to be seeing?
I would say it took me about like 4 to 5 months, but I think it was because I had an epiphany moment after like, I think early on you experience a lot of imposter syndrome and self-doubt because you might have clinical interactions that just don't go the way you want it to. And maybe it's just not a good fit ultimately, or it's just the rapport isn't there. And kind of just taking everybody and anybody who calls you initially because you're panicked that you're not going to get phone calls. Once I realized that and I changed like my psych today, I remember I was like going back and forth with for a while from like the very typical generic psych today that I audit and make fun of all the time now, which is like, I'm a trauma-informed therapist and I'll walk alongside you and I use all the modalities under the sun. But then just being like, this isn't me. And if I just say something like vulnerability is really fucking scary and it's okay for that to be the case. It's okay to be scared. It's okay to pick up the phone and like make the call. And if I use words that I actually use in everyday life, and then the phone just starts ringing off the hook. And like, it was just that moment where I was like, oh, we're in the business of like selling and marketing connection. How do we connect if we can't allow ourselves to be authentic and genuine and acknowledge that we are not going to be for everybody? Like, not everybody who comes across my website is going to be a good fit. And that's okay. And that's why networking is so crucial. So lots of aha moments. And then once that happened, floodgates kind of open and then wait lists happen and you get too busy and then you overschedule yourself because you're a helping professional and you're like, I can do more. And it's a good way to swing the pendulum into burnout too.
This idea of authenticity is huge. And when I think about authenticity, you really embody that. And it sounds like it's intentional, right? It's something that you think about. When I observe how you show up in your Facebook group, in social media, on your podcast, on your website, you are who you are. And people either love it or it turns them off and they don't like it. But like the people who don't like it aren't your people, right? And I think it's much better to be authentic and be yourself and attract people who are like-minded than to not show up authentically and not be yourself. Just the fact that you, like, if you look at your website, like you curse on your website, and a lot of therapists would never do that. But like, I love that. I think that it's great. And I think the clients who resonate with that, they're going to probably connect with you more in session, right? Like you're going to have better rapport.
100%. I mean, even back then, just with that simple statement on my site today, I would get calls from like young adult guys who were looking for a therapist. Were like, I think you're my person because you cursed. And I'm just like, okay, well,
Right.
That's mind blowing to me, but that is, it's reality because I've sat in therapy spaces as the client before when I'm concerned about like what's coming out of my mouth. And then that's a struggle. Like I want to be able to come to therapy and be myself as the client. So just switching that perspective around. When I transitioned to group practice, I had to like redo all the copy on our website. And I remember very strategically placing like things like, again, similar statements like I just said on the homepage. And our web design person at the time was, you're going to turn off more conservative clients. And I said, that's okay. Those are certainly not going to be our clients. So again, I think that's why networking is crucial because people can call and say, really looking for A, B, and C. And you can say, oh, Michael does that down the street and here's his contact. And it's just a really, it embodies like abundance mindset in a lot of ways to recognize like we are going to attract and repel by how we show up. And I think also, I know you wanted to talk about like neurodivergence and autistic identity. I know I'm like, to the outsider looking in, people are always thanking me for being my authentic self and modeling and, oh, you've inspired me to be my authentic self. And I'm just like, I'm not doing anything unusual though. I'm literally just being me and I don't know how else to be. And I think that is an autistic strength of just like, I can't be artificial or fake. I can only show up authentically me. I just now have an understanding as to why.
You have this saying that I quote all the time in my newsletter: authenticity is relatability, right? And authenticity doesn't come natural to a lot of people. I think it can be scary, right? Like, what if I'm my authentic self and I'm rejected, or people don't like it, or I get criticized? So there's that fear, right? But it sounds like you just need to push through that.
Yeah, and let's also like reframe it too, because I also think that authenticity is relatability, but I think relatability equals accessibility. So if you are relatable and you are working with clients who are parts of marginalized groups, you are creating accessibility, because that means that your queer clients, your trans clients, your BIPOC clients, your autistic clients are going to read your relatable, authentic statements, and they are going to connect with it instantly. And then they're going to know this person can be safe for me. I don't have to go and retell my story. I can literally just like drop into the experience without shame or judgment. And I think that is a really beautiful part of humanity.
I love that. You mentioned authenticity being an autistic strength. You were diagnosed with autism as an adult at 35. Can you walk through that experience and what that was like?
Yeah. I was also diagnosed ADHD, but that was probably when I was 30. But it didn't answer all the questions for me. I remember getting the ADHD diagnosis and not really being surprised. I was just kind of, again, for so long, like both autistic and ADHD culture and research and everything was all about like young white boys for a long time. So when I got an ADHD diagnosis, I was kind of just like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And I don't really think much of that. Right. But there was something missing. I actually remember like being in Hawaii at a therapist conference. I decided to go watch the Anthony Bourdain movie Roadrunner with a bunch of grief therapists. Really bad idea, by the way. They don't want to like unpack this movie afterwards. But the reality was that so much of his life, that he put on camera was so raw and so vulnerable. And there was so much pain, even when he was traveling the world. Just you would see him do shoots or interviews and you could see it all over his face. Like often my wife makes fun of me because my face doesn't lie ever. And it's just one of those situations where I was like, damn, his whole like push pull of I need to be on the go, having experiences and stimulation and excitement and all the novelty, but simultaneously needing to be home in the dark, like with my person or my safer space, and like unable to really function in a lot of ways resonated so much for me. And then I remember getting back from that and just being like, damn, I'm really struggling mentally, like, and emotionally, and can't figure out what's wrong. Like, as so many late in life people who are adults who have discovered their autism discovery later in life, there's always this feeling like I just don't belong. I don't fit in. I'm on the outside looking in. I'm surrounded by people who love me, but I can't access it. And a lot of misdiagnosis comes with this experience. Like, and you just keep trying and you keep trying and you keep trying. And you do all the late night deep dives and all the research and all the doctor's appointments and mental health visits, and nothing ever adds up. And it's really demoralizing and defeating. And I remember shortly after being at lunch with a friend, and I don't know, I must have just been probably sitting there like completely vacant and just so, I don't know, fragile emotionally. And she was like, I think you need to go get assessed for autism. I think that you'll probably have a lot of answers after that happens. And I remember being a bit offended at the time, like, because we live in an ableist society, so we experience our own internalized ableism. And I was just like, I'm not autistic. Like, I have a master's degree. I own a business, like blah, 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 blah. All the thoughts that were going through my head. But I sat with it for like a couple of weeks and then just like, I think I need to pursue this. So,
well, it sounds like that diagnosis was almost a relief in some ways to have that named.
Yeah. I talk about like the grief relief paradox a lot. There's grief, right? Of like childhood experiences, what would have been different if I would have known, if my family would have been supportive, all of that stuff. There's grief, like future grief of this is not changing. This is lifelong. There's always going to be this inherent struggle. And then there's enormous amounts of relief of just like so affirming and validating and just finally having that lens to view the world through where you're like, everything just finally makes sense. And all of that confusion and overwhelm that has gone into like this relentless searching and seeking for belonging and understanding and making sense of things is finally unlocked. And I think that's, I think late in life discovery can be unbelievably not only life altering, but life saving in so many ways.
And you talking openly about it is life saving as well, right? If it helps someone to go talk to someone about it, right? Someone who's listening, maybe they'll hear this and they'll really relate to it, and then they'll go, be assessed and maybe get some answers that they're looking for.
Yeah, for sure. I will say that ever since I pivoted my content from how to start a private practice to just like relatable autistic ADHD content, the messages are much kinder. It's always like, thank you for helping me see myself or my loved one, instead of like, you son of a bitch, you recommended this service and I hate it. And
right.
I'm like, Jesus Christ, it's just a free thing. So I don't miss that world as much anymore.
That's interesting. Yeah, I feel like there's much more negativity in the business coaching space. There's also a lot of bad actors and people who are, disingenuine in that space as well, the grifters and stuff. So
both can be true. I have had All Things Private Practice paused the Facebook group since last March. And I used to regret that because I was like, this is ultimately impacting my financial stability. I'm probably selling less retreat spots because it's not open and there were so many members. Recently, over the last 6 months, I'm so relieved. Every time it goes to get unpaused, I just push it back another 2 months. And at this point, I think I should just completely shut it down, because moderating a 15,000 person group is really not of interest to me ever again.
Yeah, when you think about where you want to spend your energy, right? I do want to talk about the shift in your niche, and even to take a step back. So when you started your private practice, kind of coming out of and still, wrestling with a gambling addiction, did you kind of build your niche around men who struggle with gambling addiction? I've heard you talk about your niche can be a version of yourself. Was that the case for you when you first started in private practice?
Yeah, for sure. I think our niche is a version of ourselves in some capacity, because so many of us get into this profession to like heal parts of ourselves at times. So at first, when I first started, mostly focused on young adult men who are struggling with addiction, and networked with a lot of halfway houses, detox centers, treatment facilities, SAIOPs, etc. And that was probably like the first year of my practice was just completely filled with people who were in some sense of recovery. And then I got kind of bored of that, and it was no longer, just wasn't doing it for me anymore. And I think our niche evolves over time as we evolve as humans. And then I started doing more attachment focused work as I did more of my own attachment focused work and dove deeper into like childhood experiences. And then I would say it evolved again into high achieving entrepreneurs who never feel good enough, because I can also relate to that. And then I actually have not practiced as a therapist since 2022, since my second throat surgery. But had I still been practicing to this day, I'm sure it would now evolve into neurodivergent entrepreneurs, and that would be where I would spend most of my energy.
Definitely. As someone who, has been following your work, and, we've been connected for 4 or 5 years, it's been interesting to watch, that progression. And I think that's great. I think a lot of therapists that I work with in a marketing capacity, they're so concerned about niching down because they feel like they're going to be pigeonholed in their practice of, I have to work with this same type of client for the rest of my career. But that's not the case. Your niche can change and evolve.
And it likely will. Even if you said today, my niche is young adult men struggling with addiction. Let's just use that as an example. As you went through your career and you had more clinical experience and more client interaction and more training, you're probably going to evolve even within that niche, and just using a different lens or different theoretical approaches and different perspectives. So don't think that if you choose a niche today, that that's the rest of your career. And I also think that if you write content really well, without sounding like a walking DSM-5, that 1 or 2 statements are all you need for someone else who doesn't fall into that niche, who reads that statement and is like, that's me too. And I think that it really is about, again, going back to that relatability piece, much more crucial than just saying, this is my niche. I work with high achieving female entrepreneurs. Okay. But if we really break it down into like what those experiences are on a daily basis, those can be applicable across the board.
And something interesting that happens too is you can appeal to someone who wants to be part of that population, right? So if you work with high achieving female entrepreneurs, a female who wants to be an entrepreneur could see that and like, oh, this is what I want to be. This is sort of a goal for me. This person specializes in that population. I want to work with them because I'm not yet in that population, but I'd like to be.
For sure. And there's got to be some common threads, right? Like most entrepreneurs take risks, they're creative, they have a lot of self-doubt. So there's going to be common threads, even if you don't like quote unquote define yourself in that population yet or see it as of yet. So super important just to know, like, I think that's so crucial, and it's just an evolving process.
You mentioned your second throat surgery. What happened with that? Because I remember when it was happening, you know, for someone who's a therapist and a podcast host and a speaker who makes a living by speaking, the idea of having throat surgery must be really scary.
Yeah, it's amazing how sometimes we don't realize how important our voices are. And there's somatic processing behind that too. And like our voices, not only just how we show up and speak, right? But like our voice and our ability to put it out into the world. And I got diagnosed with this really rare throat condition, which impacts 0.0001% of the population, all of whom are over 65. And my doctor was always like, "You're one of the lucky ones." I was like, "I'm not going to see you anymore." So cool. So I had an endoscopic surgery in 2021. The issue that I have is a chronic recurring situation. So unfortunately, as a 35-year-old at the time, meant more throat surgeries for sure. But it recurred within 4 months. And they were like, well, I guess we're going to have to do the more drastic situation now and do open throat surgery. So my biggest fear with that was always a vocal cord paralysis, which is exactly what happened. They paralyzed one of my vocal cords. So you can hear it in my voice. It's gotten a lot better, but it still has that vocal fry. And once my voice is gone for the day, it's gone. I have to be very mindful and intentional of how I spend my vocal energy each day, because it's like a very limited resource that I have at my disposal. And it really meant I had to completely pivot everything in my business. Like that meant saying goodbye to my therapy clients and coming to terms with no longer practicing as a therapist. It meant going from hosting like coaching courses and 4-month coaching programs and doing a lot of individual coaching to completely none at all. And financially, that was very scary at the time. And it's just been a thing for the last 3 years where I've really had to figure out how I want to show up and where I want to spend my energy reserves. And I was embarrassed about it at first. You can still read reviews on like, especially Divergent Conversations, my other podcast, where reviews are like, great podcast. Patrick's voice fucking sucks. And I'm like, Jesus, like, I don't even think it's that bad anymore. No. But it's been an interesting like mental and emotional process to go through, like learning how to voice differently, learning how to pitch differently, endless amounts of speech therapy. And then the realization too that if I'm in a crowded, loud environment, especially, it's just not for me. I can't speak over this volume. It still presents its challenges, but I will say it's gotten a lot better, and it's been an interesting journey for sure.
I appreciated you making the time to be here because you're busy, and I appreciate it even more knowing that, you know, you can probably only talk so much in a day. I've heard the same thing about singers. I know it's like, you know, Taylor Swift, for example, it's like she does a 3-hour show and then she doesn't meet with fans or talk to anyone after because she has to protect her vocal cords, right? And so I imagine it's a similar type of experience where you just need to be aware of how much you're talking and using your voice.
I like to think that Taylor Swift and I are one and the same.
Yeah, it's very similar.
Yeah, similar personalities, similar wealth statuses. Yeah.
Being a therapist is about helping people, not crunching numbers. But when you're running your own practice, managing finances can feel like a full-time job, one you never trained for. That's where Herd comes in. Herd is the financial management platform built just for therapists. No more cobbling together spreadsheets,
DIY software, or expensive accountants. With Herd, you get bookkeeping, tax support, and financial insights, all in one easy-to-use platform. Herd was started by an accountant and a software engineer who understand the challenges you face as a business owner. Our mission? To make it incredibly easy for therapists to manage their practice as a business, build wealth, and stay focused on what matters most, their clients. Join thousands of therapists who trust Herd with their finances. Schedule a free consultation today at joinherd.com/consult.
So it sounds like you were almost forced to, or you had to make a decision about transitioning out of private practice. And so was that when you started to offer retreats and other types of services? Was it kind of like around that same time?
So I kind of mentioned before that I have done most of these things pretty ass backwards in my life. And so I ended up like 2020 happens, COVID happens, we're all inside, and I start All Things Private Practice, and that kind of takes off. And then a year into that, I was like, damn, it's really hard to do coaching and podcasting and also see therapy clients. Then I started my group practice in 2021, and then I gave up my therapy clients in 2022. But I always wanted to do retreats. Like before I started All Things Private Practice, before COVID happened, I had the goal of starting like a travel coaching business where I would help helpers step away and immerse themselves in culture and take more risks. I didn't really know what I wanted it to be. When I pitched it at first to people, they're like, so a travel agent? I was like, no, I don't want to do that. But I also had no idea, I remember All Things Private Practice was, the popularity and the following was increasing constantly and engagement was quite good. And I just remember back in like early or mid 2021 saying like, if I hosted a retreat in Ireland, who would come? And I had so many responses and I was like, damn, I think that means I actually have to do this now. And so I have to like then deep dive the location and the resources and all the meals and the dates. And I'm like, I'm just going to slap this together and figure it out. So I ended up like creating a very basic, crappy sales page and figuring out all the details as I figured it out. Once I secured dates, I was just like, I'm going to put it together and I'm going to piece it together from that. But that's always where the fear comes, right? Because like all of those yeses in the comments section don't necessarily translate into sales. And then you book a venue and you're like, ooh, this is horrifying. But I sold that first event out and it was a phenomenal event. I remember that the FOMO from social media literally allowed me to sell out the next year in Ireland before I even touched my feet down on American soil that year. And now since that time, I just wrapped up my 4th annual Ireland retreat, which will also be my last one there. But I've hosted 20 retreats and or summits since March of 2022.
That's amazing. I imagine with these retreats, there's a lot of risk, right? Like you're putting down deposits. Like what if people don't show up? That's got to be pretty scary. But I mean, it sounds like the demand is there and the interest is there. Is it also potentially kind of a timing thing? Maybe like coming out of COVID, people have been like at home and now they're kind of wanting to kind of get back out to the world. Do you think that plays a factor?
Yeah, I think it definitely plays a factor. I mean, I think people were just itching to travel and experience, but I think more importantly, people want connection. People want community and connection. And that's what I've really tried to focus in on is intentional community and connection. A lot of people would say that one of my greatest gifts is being a community connector and like building relationships. And I think that's true. And I also think that because of the way my brain works, like I'm able to hyper focus on details that people would usually get frustrated or overwhelmed by. I put 110% of my energy into everything that I do, which is also a blessing and a curse. And like, I just try so hard to ensure that these events are worth the price of admission. I've never not sold an event out. And I know that is really unusual because I actually host events on how to build retreats. And it really saddens me when people have really good retreat ideas, but they fall flat and it's kind of demoralizing for them and understandably so. But you have to have a captive audience. Like you can have the best retreat idea in the world, but if you're unwilling to show up on social media or you don't have any sort of following or audience, it's really hard to sell spots to anything. So I really try to emphasize that when I'm doing those trainings specifically, like, y'all, marketing and consistency and showing up is so damn important. And you know this as a marketing professional. Like, if you were just to launch retreats today without any sort of presence, that know, like, and trust factor is not established, it's really hard to purchase a spot at something on the word of someone else. Like, you really have to trust the source, especially, you mentioned some bad actors in the field. You just have to be consistent, and you have to be reliable, and you have to put a good product out there. Because even myself, could be because I closed my Facebook group down, but I would say that this year it's been harder for me to sell spots than it ever has been before. We could blame what's happening in the world right now for a lot of reasons, and I'm sure that has a lot to do with it. But it's also that the market is now much more saturated. So, and my events are high ticket events, like typically between $4,000 to $6,000 a person. And I think they're worth the price of admission, but that doesn't mean that I don't have to constantly find innovative ways to market them and get them in front of a new audience too.
Putting my herd hat on. These events are almost entirely a business expense for therapists, right? The purpose is professional development, networking. So your flights, your travel, your hotel, the cost of the retreat, all of that is a business expense that can be written off. Now, if you go early or extend your trip and you turn it into a personal trip, you need to be a little bit careful that, you know, you're not trying to write off your personal expenses. But if you're listening to this and you just, you know, this is going to air probably sometime in June, but you paid a shit ton in taxes last year and you're like, man, I really need to get this tax bill down. I need to figure out, you know, what are some business expenses that I qualify for and can kind of reinvest in my business, not just spending money to spend money. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But if you're someone who's, you know, wants to travel anyway,
it's a win-win.
You know, it's not a free trip, but it
also comes with, like, at least all of my events come with CEUs too.
Mm.
So it's like it's even sweeter situation. I've really tried to go off the beaten path. If you're going to come to my events, like, we're not going to do things in typical popular locations. Like, my Ireland event is in a village called Ferns, Ireland. And if you were to go over to Ireland right now and ask Irish people if they know where that is, they would either look at you like they have no idea what you're talking about or ask you, why the hell would you go there? But for me, getting off the beaten path and really getting into the local culture and really supporting the local small businesses and really, like, having this special type of experience is exactly what I was looking for. And that's exactly what I found when I did my first Ireland event. And this village has less than 1,000 people. It's got a church built in the 1100s, a castle built in the 1100s, 3 pubs and 1 restaurant. And it's just beautiful and green and wonderful. And, like, that's it. But, like, you know, I think everyone has different traveling styles. And for me, what I've seen be the most special piece is the people who come first time out of the country, first time traveling solo, first time going to an event where you're going to spend 5 days with 20 other humans. That risk and stepping out of your comfort zone propels you not only professionally, but personally. And I think travel is the ultimate guide on how to really move through this world. And I think that it really helps propel us into my doubt yourself, do it anyway mentality, which is each risk builds on itself and compounds, and you strengthen that foundation so that when you want to launch that podcast, launch that course, start a group practice, you know that you have done scary stuff in the past and you can rely and anchor into that. And that, for me, is the most important piece of all of what I've done over the last couple of years.
You mentioned doubt yourself, do it anyway, which has become your tagline, a catchphrase, one of many. Where did that come from? When did that start?
I don't know when I started using it, but I did trademark it. I don't remember when I started using that, but in reality, it really, like, is the epitome of everything I've done and created, because I've been filled with so much self-doubt and fear and imposter syndrome and perfectionism throughout my entire life. And I just realized that the more you step out of your comfort zone and take risks, the more you can unlock these really unbelievably cool experiences and life-changing, transformative situations. I never expected to be sitting here having you read the bio that you read. And sometimes it really is about putting ourselves out there and getting started. And I think for most people, that is the hardest part, is the vulnerability of trying and the fear of failure. But I always think we should talk about failure in a positive way, like as a data point, just a blip on the radar, something to learn, pivot, and adapt from. And too many people hold themselves back from their potential because of all of those things. And you ever watch the movie Bronx Tale? There's a line where Robert De Niro is telling his son, like, the saddest thing in the world is wasted talent. And I think that's true because so many of your listeners and our followers in general, like, you have so many good ideas, but there's so much fear that coincides with getting started or getting bigger or, not playing it small. And I think it's unfortunate because I've seen so many people over these last 5 years who just can't get out of their own ways for one reason or another.
When I talk to the therapist about imposter syndrome, I'll ask them, what's the worst thing that could happen? You put yourself out there, it doesn't work. People don't sign up for your course. Maybe you lose some money, if you are putting on a retreat or event or something like that, right? But typically, like, the worst thing that can happen is it doesn't work. And the world keeps spinning and people may notice, they may not. And if they did notice, they'll probably forget about it. With that said, have you put something out or have you done something, whether it was a product or a service that you were offering and it didn't work? And not that it was a failure, but it was something that, it didn't go how you thought it would.
If I'm defining like didn't work by sales, then no. Everything I've put out, courses, coaching programs, retreats, everything has worked. But that doesn't mean it's not unbelievably horrifying to do it. It was unbelievably horrifying to give that TEDx. It was unbelievably horrifying to pitch a book deal to a bunch of agents and editors. It was unbelievably horrifying to start a private practice back in 2017. I've never not experienced that. But I've noticed now that if I'm starting to feel that feeling, that like racing heart rate and that increasing amount of self-doubt, that I'm probably on the right track. And I'm using it more as a compass now and as a guide, being more willing to put things out there into the world. So I would say there are things I would do differently if I could take some things back and change certain things. I think I've rushed things early on in the past in terms of like marketing or launching or not having patience for things. But ultimately, I would say that the fear has never really left me. It's just I've found a new relationship with it. And it's also allowed me to grow and take more risks and to have more security, knowing that if I do fall flat and it doesn't work, that I will be okay. And I think that's been hugely instrumental.
I love that reframe too, right? Of if something doesn't work, especially from a marketing or sales perspective, right? Like we put something out there, we launch something and no one signs up and no one buys. That's also good information. Like, okay, that wasn't the thing that I needed to sell, right? Like there's not demand for that. There's not interest in that. So that's the data point. Okay, I've learned that. Now I can pivot and do something else.
Yeah, absolutely. Did I not give myself enough runway? Did I market it consistently? Did I show up consistently? Like, there are so many ways that we can kind of step back and analyze things in that way where it's like, okay, if I do this again, I'll change this, or I'll give myself more time, or I'll hire someone and delegate certain tasks that I just struggle with. So I think there's a lot to be learned from those types of experiences.
You mentioned that you recently gave a TEDx talk. It's kind of as part of this journey of self-discovery and an autism diagnosis. I mean, that was the topic of the talk. I've heard it. It was excellent. How did you get the opportunity to give that talk? Because I'm sure there's folks who are listening who may be interested in giving a TED talk or TEDx talk someday.
Yeah. So you don't have to be a professional speaker to do a TEDx, that's for sure. So can eliminate that from your thinking if that's where your mind goes. I knew I wanted to do a TED talk for a long time. I never got started on the application processes. The applications for each event are all individually very unique and very specific. They almost want to weed out like people who are just generically throwing their name into all these events. Some of the application be like, and why do you want to give this talk specifically in the mountains of Colorado or whatever? And I'm like, I don't fucking know.
I don't.
I don't really care about that, right? So like you do have to finesse the application a bit, but I did hire a TEDx speaker coach. His name is Michael Ashford. He is the marketing director for the receptionist for iPad. He and I have been good friends for the last couple of years, and He's a wonderful speaker coach. He's really, really talented at it. He helped me with my application. He helped me like really navigate some stuck points about it, because he was like, you have a message, as we all do. And it's just a matter of putting yourself out there, because you're going to get some rejections too. So I tried a couple of events, got a couple of rejections, and then got a direct request from someone in the TEDx Manitou Springs department that was like, we'd really like you to do your talk at Break Free this February. And I was like, damn, that sounds like a good topic for this event or for this speech. So the same thing with the book deal, you know, is just, you're going to have to put yourself out there, and you are going to have to come to terms with rejection. And that can be really hard for people, and even for myself and at this stage. But I am glad that I'm able to work through that fear of rejection, because none of this stuff would be possible without overcoming it.
We've talked a lot about vulnerability and authenticity, and there was this moment during your TED Talk where you like forgot what you were going to say, or like messed up. And I think where most people would panic and freeze, you just leaned into it. And I think you said like, fuck, I fucked up or something. And like everyone cheered and laughed. And it was just like, it was honestly so cool to just witness that live, right? Like you're living what you're saying, and it almost could have been planned. Like, I'm not saying that it was, but like the fact that that came up and then you just leaned into it was like what you were talking about. And like, there couldn't have been something that would have happened that would have been more authentic. Right. And so I think you turn this moment of like, wow, I just ruined this like opportunity into like, you made it better. Like it,
you know, that's so one, I just appreciate you saying that. And that was the general feedback. Like, I was amazed that people were like clapping for that, because, you know, you're on stage. I don't ever script my talks at any event I've ever spoken at. I really do improvise it. I have a general idea of what I'm going to talk about, but like, I like to read the room. I like to pay attention to what's being said around me. Like, I need to pick up on the energy. So then I will craft my talk. Even for my Italy summit that I just hosted, like, I didn't know what I was going to talk about until I stepped on stage, and it was wonderful. You know, like, that's just how my brain typically works. And for TEDx, you have to script your talk and you have to memorize it. So right before my talk, they could not get the technology to work for the live stream. And I was panicking and freaking out, because I was in the green room and they were telling me the whole time, like, we can't get it to work. We don't think we will. But just to let you know, you have like 200 people in the waiting room right now. And I'm like, stop telling me this. This is not helpful. So when I got on stage, I honestly forgot half of my script in that moment. I was just like so hyper focused on my frustration about this situation. Then I got into the flow and I forgot the line. And then I realized I forgot the line. I was like, fuck, I forgot. But I think I recovered well. And like, I also think I ended it in the most autistic way possible, which was basically like, I finished. Obviously, no one knows that you're finished. So I'm just like looking around and I'm like, I don't know what to do. I'm done. So I will say that the person who organized it said in her 10 years of organizing TED Talks, it was the best one she's ever seen. So I would say that it, you know, went as good as it could.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you have a book coming out as well. You mentioned, is it on the same topic?
Yeah. So I, like I said, everything is ass backwards. So I decided like 6 months ago that I needed to get this book idea out of my head. I started writing one night. I turned Lord of the Rings on repeat on my TV, and I wrote for like 10 straight hours. And before I know it, I have like 55,000 words written. And I was like, holy shit. So then I pitched a bunch of agents, wrote the proposal, and then I just met with 5 different publishers a couple of weeks ago and came to a really awesome book deal and partnership that I can't publicly state right now, and I'm really excited for it. And I asked my agent, I said, how come in these meetings we're not telling these editors that I already have the manuscript done? He's like, because this is not how this typically works. Like, you get the book deal, then you write the book. And I was like, oh, well, that's news to me. I had no idea.
That's awesome. All right, we're coming to the end here. We're going to try something new this season. We'll see how it goes. We're going to wrap up these episodes with some rapid fire questions. All right. First one, favorite curse word?
It's a word that I want to trademark as well. I would go with shit weasel.
Nice.
Yeah.
Oh, it's surprising. I thought you
Yeah.
were going to say fuck, but okay.
No.
Profession if you weren't a therapist.
Oh man, I would really love to be at like an animal sanctuary, specifically with like maybe red pandas, maybe sloths, maybe the combination of the two. That would be pretty amazing. Or a travel planner, one of the two.
How do you feel about therapists using AI?
I mean, we live in 2025, it's not going anywhere. Use it ethically. It's going to help you probably more than it's going to hurt you in a lot of ways. And it's not going to replace you as a therapist.
What's your hottest or most controversial take about private practice?
Hottest or most controversial take? Oh my God. I want to write a book all about this. I mean, therapy is wild, y'all. Like just the stuff that gets posted in some of these groups. I mean, money stuff, y'all. Like you can be a therapist and make money. You're just going to have to get comfortable with that. And there's so much judgment in therapy spaces. It's wild. Like people shaming each other or using the unethical or licensure board word. Like it's not something that we should try hard to avoid. I don't know. It's wild. I can't even think straight because that makes me mad.
No, totally resonate with that. What's a class that you wish you took in graduate school, but you didn't?
Something about starting a business. I mean, I think it should be built into every counselor social work curriculum, just even if it's a elective course on how to start a business.
Absolutely. I know you're a big movie and TV guy. Do you have a favorite therapist from a movie or TV show?
Yes, I do. Well, I have three. Okay, because Shrinking is so good, I have to say that like Gabby and Paul or Harrison Ford, they're great. They're fantastic. But Dr. Sharon and Ted Lasso is also fantastic. So those three.
I love that. Last question, and then you're off the hot seat. What's one thing that you want therapists to take away from this conversation?
Doubt yourself, do it anyway. I mean, you really have to move into this mindset of pursue the things that you're passionate about, allow yourself to fail, allow yourself to make mistakes because you're going to, and just give yourself permission to be human.
Well said. Thank you so much, Patrick. Where can folks find you if they're interested in learning more about the work that you do?
Thanks, Michael. Okay, so you can go to allthingspractice.com, which has my podcast, All Things Private Practice, Divergent Conversations, and all of my retreats that are coming up. And you can find me on Instagram, patrick.casale. I have space in our group practice ownership retreat in Hania in Greece in September. And then I have 2 retreats that will be happening in March of 2026 in New Zealand. And everything else is sold out.
Greece sounds amazing. You may see me there.
Awesome. It's so beautiful. Like it's amazing. Yeah.
We'll drop those links in the show notes so people can check that out. Thanks, Patrick. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, man.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Herd Business School, brought to you by Herd, the financial management platform for therapists. To get the class notes for this week's episode, go to joinherd.com/podcast. And don't forget to subscribe on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll see you in the next class.